a great conference. I was able to speak last year as well, and looking forward to this. I find it somewhat ironic, as you'll see during my talk today, that they chose this room for my speech. It's actually extremely appropriate. I couldn't have asked for anything better. During the speech today, I'm going to show the chimp head quite a bit. That's our logo. But it also is sort of to highlight things that you should be writing down or taking note of, or things that should go into your business's disaster recovery and business continuity plan. And those will be my bullet points today. So who am I? I'm Stephen Felt. I'm a systems administrator. I've been web admin and slash sysadmin slash developer slash CTO slash lots of things for a lot of years. Currently, I'm with Demo Chimp. I'm the CTO. At the time of this disaster, though, that we're going to talk about today, I was not with Demo Chimp. This predates Demo Chimp. I was with a company called Middlebury Interactive Languages, and I was a software architect. And in the case of this disaster, of course, I took on a lot of other roles that I would not normally have to take on. So what is this talk today? It's real life, real world experience. I don't pretend to be an attorney or Sarbanes-Oxley expert. So I'm not trying to give legal advice. If your company is serious about disaster recovery, business continuity, you'll want to pursue those avenues, right? You'll want to make sure you get all your I's dotted and your T's crossed. Although I will be giving you some notes at the end about resources you could use to pursue that, to get more information about how to get your business in compliance. So what is disaster recovery? Frankly and simply, it's the process of getting back to business, getting your business back online after some major interruption has occurred. Now, those interruptions may not be the type of interruption I'm going to talk about today, right? Disasters can be minor things, temporary things like power outages. It doesn't necessarily mean that your entire company is going to be in the situation we're going to describe today. Business continuity is the process of keeping your business going in the face of disaster. One of the things I'd like to underline during this speech today is that don't let perfection be the enemy of good, right, as Voltaire said. Don't not have a plan, because a full plan is very complex. Don't let the complexity of a big plan keep you from having even a little plan. In the case of disaster recovery and business continuity, the very most basic plan can help you to limp through and keep your business from going under. So don't let the idea of having a huge plan keep you from having even a little one. So here's a picture. This is my son. There's something really ominous and scary about this picture. Didn't realize it at the time, and it's not my son. If you look off to the left there, you'll see that there's a pile of this nice rock. How many here are from Utah, Utah Valley, Utah in general? Okay, we live on an alluvial fan, which means water coming down the canyon has been rolling rocks out of the canyon for millions of years, right? They go from being very square to being very round. People who live up on the bench, so there's a bench here, this is just off the bench in Provo, have been rolling their rocks off of the side of the hill for, I don't know, hundreds of years, right? Not quite as long. And all of those rocks end up sort of in a nice cascading pile on the side of the mountain. Well, our business was actually at the base of that mountain. So if you're preparing for business continuity in the face of a disaster, first of all, don't think that it won't happen to you. How many here have been in a disaster situation? So I see about 4 hands. How many of you have had business interrupted for more than just a couple of hours, or any reason? A couple of hands. What are some examples of things that interrupted business for you? Just shout them out.
Well, most recently, Utopia's outage last week.
Utopia's outage. How long did it last?
All day.
All day. Right. Anyone else want to volunteer?
Construction hitting power lines.
Power lines. So these things happen, right? They interrupt your business. Have you put a cost on that? How much does it cost your company to have people fallow and not able to work? When do you send people home? So in my 15 years of full-time work, I've seen all sorts of interruptions. I've seen a natural gas leak, right, which is very exciting when there's a natural gas leak close by. you get evacuated very quickly. No questions are asked, and you get whisked out of your place of business carefully and quickly, right? You don't want to spark anything, you don't want to smoke, but you've got to get away very quickly. I've also been in a flood. Like one day I came into work. This was not the disaster we're talking about today. I came into work. I came into the stairwell. We're in a basement kind of an area, and I took the last step off onto the landing in the dark, and it felt like I stepped into a bathtub. Like literally, water sloshed against my ankle, and I stepped down, and I just sort of stood there for a minute. It was early in the morning, and I thought, am I still asleep or something? It was just very surreal. It turns out that the building owner had a plumber come in the night before, and he'd done some work. Well, when you turn the water back on after you've done some work, what do you always do?
Make sure it's not leaking.
Make sure it's not leaking, right? It seems pretty basic. You check. You go and check the work that you did and make sure it's not leaking. Well, this plumber didn't. And over the course of the entire night, the entire basement filled up with about 6 inches of water. So these disasters do occur. It's really just a matter of time before some major disaster will come. So list your company's essential assets. And why do we do this? We do it because if we don't know what's most important, we don't know what to focus on in the case of a disaster. If you don't know what to focus on, if you don't know what your most important assets are, start with the basics. What is your company's value proposition? Who are your customers? What do you offer those customers? And what could interrupt it? These are the points that should go into your disaster recovery business continuity plan. So some examples of things that can interrupt business, right? Fire, earthquake, flood. Each of those things should go into your disaster recovery plan. You don't respond the same way to a fire that you do to an earthquake, or to an earthquake the way that you would respond to a flood, or to a flood the way you would respond to a power outage, or the death of your CEO, right? There are some elements that are common to all these situations. For example, having good communication open to you in the case of disaster is very important. Having everyone's contact information, having their wife's contact information. Where do they go on vacation? Right? Who succeeds the CEO in your company if he's not available? He may not be dead, but he might not be available. What about Eric? Every company I think that I've worked at has had an Eric. Eric worked in the back room of our company. He rarely came out. He didn't talk to people much. He was responsible for some of our core infrastructure and programming. No one else knew quite what Eric did or does. He's still alive. So. But one day he didn't come into work. And guess what? Sometimes a small problem becomes a big problem. Guess what else happened that day, that same morning?
Something blew up.
Website was down. The part that Eric was responsible for was down. No Eric, no website. Oh my gosh, what do we do? Right. We had a bit of a disaster. We had no succession plan for our developer, Eric. So I like to call that the bus contingency. Everyone in your company should have a backup person. If they get hit by a bus, if they don't come in, you need to be able to fall back and ask someone else to take their place. So the point is, without a plan, even small interruptions can turn into major problems. Medium interruptions, right? Temporary things without a plan, turn into bigger problems, etc. Huge problems become impossible disasters that take out your company in the case of their absence of a plan. And when Eric didn't come into work, a lot of people were like, who's Eric? I'll tell you what, our COO found out who Eric was and got in the car and drove to Eric's house. Again, luckily, Eric wasn't dead, but it turned into a very exciting day. So sometimes even this happens. So the unexpected. This room is where our developers sat. This is my chair over here. This is another developer, so you see this, what this says right here. Water damage? You wonder why they put that on the side of phone books, right? This is why. So we use the phone books to prop up our monitors. But what you need to understand is this is a workstation, right? This is workstation number 2, and in front of this was workstation number 3. So this entire room, the ceiling over here is about 18 feet. So this is an unusually tall ceiling, right, in this room. This is our conference table. Extremely heavy. The Rock didn't think so. So sometimes even the most unexpected can occur. Those Herman Miller Aeron chairs, you see those? They actually stand up under rock quite well. Not part of their marketing campaign. So what were some of the fortunate things here? Fortunate that all of the developers work on laptops at our company. What else was fortunate? This happened on a Saturday.
No one was there.
No one was there when this occurred. You can imagine it would have been a different story. You would have heard a lot more about it.
It's hard to replace them, not companies.
Yeah, it's much easier to replace conference. You can see this wall over here has been pushed out. This building is an old building. I think it was put up in the 70s. They call it Provo architecture. The walls are amazingly thick. Right? The walls are like 2 feet thick concrete pieces. They stand up and they hook them together like just big sections. It didn't go down. Right? What if we had a regular brick and wood structure? That's what this was right here. This little window was full of wood, right, where they patched it over. Give you some more perspective. This speaker right here is about this big, right? So that wall's been completely pushed out.
When did this occur?
What's that?
When did this occur?
Saturday, 7th of September, 2013. So you'll just have to imagine for this first video. I've got a couple of videos here. HDMI. Yay! We've got audio. So this was on a Saturday. I'm at my daughter's soccer game, and all of a sudden the guy comes around a golf cart and he's like, "We're calling it. We're out of here. We're done." And if you played soccer, you know that soccer doesn't get called off for just anything, right? Soccer players will play in the snow, they'll play in the rain, they'll play in hail, they'll play in anything. So it hadn't even started raining yet, and he was calling the game, and I thought, that's awfully strange. So I took my kids to the car, and I turned around and looked over, and over the Orem bench was an amazing, just bunch of clouds, just roiling and boiling. I even got out my camera to take some video of it because it was such an amazing sight. And about 2 minutes later, the rain came. And if you remember this storm, in Utah, we don't get rain like this. We got over an inch of rain in just a matter of minutes. And it was instantaneous flood. The visibility was essentially zero. And so instead of going home, I thought, you know what? Work is only a mile away. Instead of going home, I'm going to take my kids to work. We'll weather the storm there. So I got to work, and this is what met me at work. This is the back of our building. At this time, the slide is actually, I didn't realize that the slide was still in progress as we were here. You can see all of this rock is actually still moving. This water, can you see the river coming out? This is the same, you remember the picture of my son? This is the tree he was standing in front of. We've already got 3 to 5 feet of rock right here, and it's piling up against the back of the building. So you never know. Somebody's sprinkler pipe, did you see that? On top of the pile. So we went to work to weather the storm. Little did we know what was waiting for us at work. If we'd gotten there 5 minutes earlier, it would have been a much different story for us. That room is where I would have been with my kids. It's where we like to hang out when I go to work on Saturdays with the kids. I'll show you what was going on above. This is what was going on about that time above where we were at. And this road, you can see kind of the outline of where the road used to go, right through here. Now the rock's piled up. something to point out. You see the fellow in a white hat? I think he was CERT. I didn't get to talk to him, so I don't know for sure. You know what CERT is? Emergency response team, right? The community. The police officers got the right idea, although he, like other police officers, kind of just stood around that day. They did not know what to do. But the CERT guy is trying to kind of get people back, right? And this fellow's got his shovel. You guess why he's got a shovel? He was using it for sounding the road. He wanted to see whether or not the road was safe. So again, this is right up from our company's literally at the bottom of this hill. You can see the rock is piling up, and it's piled up. This is, again, that 18-foot ceiling right there. Our parking lot. So don't think it won't happen to you. Interruptions happen to everybody, right? It's just a matter of when and what kind of interruption you'll have. Hopefully it won't be nearly this dramatic. This is for scale, a picture from the parking lot. This is a scooter. Someone left their scooter at work. This is the parking lot on the other side of the building. This is what I first pulled into, and it was surreal. You know, great. Where did the parking lot go? It was just silt and dirt and rock. You can see someone standing in the break of the trees there. That's the top of the hill. Where the hill used to be, you can see there's just a sudden loss of it. It's behind the tree mostly, but the hill basically just collapsed down. Into our office.
What town is this in?
Provo. Yeah, this was September 7th last year.
What part of Provo?
820 north. So just right off of the hill. 820 north and about
Like
18
Grandview?
something west. What's that?
Like Grandview?
Yeah. So right down the base of that hill. So the road turns nicely there, but guess what? Water doesn't care. It's kind of funny too. The city now has filled this space in with more rock and dirt. And bless their hearts if I've got a picture here. Okay, here's the CERT fellow. So in the case of a disaster, people don't always keep their wits about them, right? He set up these cones to tell people it's not safe to go in there. And then where does he stand? On the other side of the cone, the wrong side of the cones. To go back a picture or two, this is where they're standing. And this goes back, and it was just going back. As they were standing there, it was just eroding back. Most of the water had stopped by this time, but still, stand back from the precipice, right? Don't go where it's not safe to go. Here's another picture of inside the room. You see the rock has pushed everything over. We've got monitors here that kind of surfed. The light stuff stayed on top. MacBook Pro. This was one of several.
It survived very well.
It did not come out of that alive. So your business continuity basics. What are the most basic things that go into your simple plan? Contact information. When this went down, I was the first one on the scene, not my responsibility. But you know, you jump into action, right? You don't just stand there. So I started calling everyone whose phone number I happened to have in the company, starting with the most senior person. So what else are you going to do? Right? Succession plan. The CEO can't be reached. Who steps in? The particular manager or particular team can't be reached. Who steps in? Of course, you've got to practice and review, and that schedule will go into your plan as well. So what's most important to your company? It's going to differ from company to company. Some companies are really just websites, right? Think about Facebook. You know, no one goes to Facebook. So think about your company. What's most important to you? You've got your website, maybe your delivery vans, your dev team, your trade secrets, the road to your warehouse, your offshore team, your distribution network. Any of those things could be your most important assets that need to be protected, need to be planned for. This is another picture. This is the top of someone's desk. It's really quite a nice rock garden now. Anyone play disc golf here? That's a disc golf disc. Sitting on top of a stack of iPads. 3 or 4 iPads there. Kind of a comical side note, I took these iPads into the kitchen and rinsed them off into the tap. And as I was doing so, they came on. I was like, There's no way to get a battery out of an iPad. There's nothing you can do. So we rinsed them off the best we could. And they actually, for the most part, survived. You know, they're scratched up, but they survived. My guess is that's because the mixture of water and mud was too thick to get sucked into all those little gaps.
Your rinsing really helped, right?
Yeah, rinsing wasn't the, what do you do, right? Rock, sand, dirt on your iPad, rinse it off.
Can't hurt it worse.
Wet wipes.
Scratching water. Running water is the best than scratches.
Yeah, that was my idea, is just get the dirt off of it the best we could.
Was your water still running?
Yeah, water was fine. Pipes weren't broken, gas wasn't affected, electricity was on. It was, you know, it's a little surreal when you're wading through mud and the lights are on.
Yeah.
Like if you go like this, work looks perfectly normal. And you go like this, and it's definitely something wrong. This is Michelle. She was a person who had a key. I had access to the building, but the access that I had was blocked by rock, literally. So Michelle came. I was able to get a hold of her by cell phone. Her date brought her. Again, disasters don't happen at the most convenient times. Luckily, her date drives a large pickup truck, which came in handy for the next phase, which was run around in a panic and get everything that we think might get ruined or is valuable into a truck, transport it out. So emergency contact information. Does everyone have it? Can everyone get to it in the case of a disaster? Another fortunate thing is we had just so happened to have rearranged our seating chart the week before the disaster. This is our cubicle plan. This is our layout. And based on this, we were able to sort of box up people's possessions at their desk with their name on it so that we could then return their possessions to them later. So again, we just so happen to have this, but wouldn't it be nice to actually plan ahead and have this in your disaster recovery and business continuity plan? Where do people sit? And then on a slightly grim note, I mean, you remember was it Cicero? There was a Roman meeting of people. You remember the building collapsed? The building collapsed, and he was able to tell them where everyone was sitting. He happened to have left because he could remember exactly where they were sitting. Now it's a mnemonic technique. But in the case of building collapse, earthquake, who's at work? Who's not at work? Where do they sit? Who was here this day? Who wasn't here this day? You know, the mudslide that you hear about, the mudslides you hear about on the news, very frequently they have people who are unaccounted for. A lot of times they just don't know for sure whether those people were there at the time of the slide.
With this slide, could you show us just how big the rock area was coming in
Say again.
on your map there, give us a better.
Oh, so the rocks actually came in. See the devs pointing this way?
Okay.
The devs were actually in another room. If the seating chart continued, this is where the rock was.
Okay.
The mud completely inundated this part of the building. Well, I mean, the floor, right? We had about 6 inches of mud. And then it ran through the rest of the building. So this area had about 5 inches of silt and sand and dirt. The entire building, the water was flowing hard enough that the entire building was ruined. Well, I mean ruined. They pulled out all the sheetrock, pulled up all the carpet, and pulled everything out. But it was, the entire building had flood and mud damage. This is another shot of those iPads immediately after they've been pulled out the drawer. Again, this is someone's workstation. It's actually kind of pretty in a strange sort of way, all that rock.
New feng shui.
So what else was lucky in our situation? We didn't plan for this particular disaster, but there are things you can do to prevent disaster. Our customers didn't know we had a disaster, for the most part, until the news. Because we're in Heroku. Heroku rides on top of AWS. AWS is Amazon Web Services. So the cloud is basically unaffected by local turbulence. But what if this had been our web server? When I first walked into the room, after I got into the dev room, this is about 8 inches of silt. This is the very most accessible part of the room. I stepped on something. I went, how did a couch cushion get in here? That must have just been the craziness of thing. Yeah, it wasn't a couch cushion, it was one of our servers. We look close. This is the back of the server, power supply. It was just a lump in the floor after all of this had happened. Luckily, all the computers that were in this room, well, unluckily, they were sitting at the exact apex of where all the dirt and rock came in. But luckily, all of these servers were just sandboxes. Sandboxes. More choice of term. But they were just places where the developers built things and played with things. So the fact that they were destroyed, all that was lost was the monetary value of these computers, and it was minimal. Again, the stuff that mattered was in the cloud. So think about that when you're planning your disaster recovery business continuity. So how do you improve your chances of weathering a storm like this? One thing you can do is identify single points of failure. I'm going to use some terms that are very common in the IT world, right? When you're planning out an infrastructure, you try to identify single points of failure, meaning places where there is no redundancy. In a lot of companies, your office internet connection is a single point of failure. In our case, we had had problems with our internet connection in the past. We had Comcast, we had Veracity, because we lost both of them at different times. So we had two connections coming in, two internet pipes. Is it expensive? Maybe, right? But you have to weigh the cost of something like that against the lost productivity. Power failure. When the power goes down, what do your employees do? In the absence of a plan, everyone just sort of left to their own devices, right? And the point when something happens is not the time to make a plan. In our case, we had a fellow, I changed his name, Bob. He sent 30 salaried employees home when we had a very short-term power failure. In about 15 minutes, and he said, okay, everybody go home. They're salaried. Doesn't do the company any good to send them home. We have light, we have windows. There was no reason to send anyone home. 5 minutes later, the power came back on, and everyone had already left. So what's the cost of that? 30, you know, you can do some simple math, it doesn't have to be exact. 30 people times an average salary, let's say $20 an hour, that's $600, times, say, 5 hours. $3,000 of productivity lost. So needless to say, Bob was very embarrassed.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
Didn't these people have the ability to work remotely?
Well, some of them were even on laptops.
Okay.
Some of them could have stayed at their desks.
Right.
Right? These Macs have a nice backlit keyboard, and they didn't need full light. And lots of them could have taken their laptops home and worked on them. But there was no plan.
Right.
So when the lights are off and everyone's milling around wondering what to do, Bob takes things into his own hands because he feels like he's got to do something as a manager. And he says, okay, now's my chance to make an executive decision. Everyone go home. So the point is, a small challenge turns into a big problem in the absence of a plan. So what would a better plan have been? What should he have done? Maybe call Rocky Mountain Power and ask for an estimate. How long do you think the power will be out? And they won't give you a concrete number. Maybe they don't know for sure. We'll say, well, we're looking at 1 hour, 5 hours. You know, get an approximate and then act on that. But in the absence of a plan, you just do whatever you can. So what was our plan? We didn't have one. No business recovery, no disaster, or sorry, business continuity, no disaster recovery plan. So September 7th, Saturday, no plan. September 8th, Sunday, the executive team, knowing that something has happened in Provo, but not fully understanding the significance of it, not being on the ground, they get together. They're 2 time zones away. And what do they start to do? Put together a plan. Oh my gosh, what do we do? What do we do? And in Provo, we just keep scrambling. This is Monday, September 9th. Still no plan. September 10th, the executive team calls us and says, we've got a plan. Don't do anything. We're going to send somebody. Just hold tight. And here we are scrambling. It's Tuesday. Right? We've been down for 2 days. We've been doing our best. Moving people to another location temporarily and getting them set up and keeping them working. You know, it seemed like the right thing to do. September 11th, help arrives. And this is what they sent us.
Oh,
A young guy wet behind the ears, another bad metaphor. He was wearing a pair of nice leather-soled shoes. He was an attorney, and he just had one dumbfounded expression on his face. The first thing he did was he went to Lowe's to buy some shoe covers, which ended up not being, anyway. They weren't rubber, so the water soaked through and his shoes were ruined. But by this time, some of the employees are productive again, because we've whisked everyone to a warehouse and we've got people set up and working again. But still, there's disruption. People haven't settled. And in the absence of a plan, panic sets in, right? No one knows what exactly they're supposed to be doing, so they just do their best. This is a picture from Sunday. I came over on my bicycle because there's nothing better to do. You can see that it had been roped off. We couldn't get back in to get in anymore. So the infrastructure that we saved on Saturday was all the infrastructure that we had until we got back in late in the week, which was like a week later. See, this is the inside of the building, the water, see the condensation running down the windows on the inside. You know, your electronics don't like condensation. This is the reflection in the window. You can see the scooter. Someone propped it back up, pulled it out from under the rock. So cleanup was in process. But productivity was at a bare minimum. You can see some of the things that happened, right? There's a trash can and things that have been pushed by the mud and the water. So the idea in creating a business continuity and disaster recovery plan, ask yourself, if resources are scarce, what do we focus on? It's not always a fun process, but you need to decide what is most important to your business. Yeah.
Question for you. I noticed the yellow tape that said, "Do not cross fire line." I'm assuming that it was either building inspectors and or the fire department that shut down the building and wouldn't let anybody back in.
That's right.
Did you learn to perhaps not call them until a little bit after you got all your stuff out?
Yeah, we did.
Is that part of your plan?
So the police called them. And actually, in hindsight, we were rather foolish. I mean, I didn't let my kids go into the building, right? They were in the car. Why didn't I let them go into the building?
So it's safe.
Because it wasn't safe. What does Dad do? Charges into the building, right? This is my company. I've been in IT. I want to keep this alive. And in the moment of the rush, the adrenaline and everything, you're like, what do we save? We've got to save everything we can. But yeah, so they did. They came in and they didn't condemn the building, but they roped it off and said, until we've got engineers in here to inspect this, and we've got tons and tons and tons of rock leaning on that back wall, right? And again, I'm amazed at the structure, but it didn't heave a bit.
So in the future, if it happens again, and I hope it doesn't, you not go into the building, you leave all the stuff in there, you get additional equipment from somewhere else to set up in the warehouse down the street?
Yeah,
what do you do?
In the case of a fire? Right? What do you do? Will they let you back in? Will the fireman let you back into the building?
No.
So you really should build your plan based on the assumption that you won't have access to the building. Remember, this is also a metaphor, right? Like, build your plan based on the assumption that you won't be able to get access to AWS. Build your plan based on the assumption that you won't be able to get access to your supply chain. And if you build it that way, worst case scenario, then when a slightly worst case scenario occurs, it's not as big of a deal.
Well, and I think it's important too, as you said, identify what things do need to get out. And if there was a dangerous situation, if there is a list in your mind at least of the 6 things that are critical, you're not running around the building going, gosh, what else is important? What else is important?
And that's what we did. That's exactly what we did.
The number one priority in that situation is the protection of personal safety and staff. There's nothing in that building that's worth someone's life.
That's exactly right. And I agree with you 100%. But it's in hindsight.
Right.
Yeah, right. There was no plan. Your business continuity, disaster recovery, whatever plan should probably say, if the situation is not deemed to be safe, do not enter the premises.
So did I understand that this business is primarily web-based?
Yes.
So the impact to your customers was
was almost nil at the time of the disaster. So this brings up another question though. What else is valuable to your company? There are intangibles, right? What about your image? What about your brand, right? How do you want your customers to know that you've had a disaster? Do you want them to hear it from you? Or do you want them to hear it from the news? So my internet connection is working. Do you have a comment or a question?
I was going to comment, last night, another business was talking about where they had a truck drove through the server.
I'm going to talk about that.
So let's see the flip side of it.
So this was from the local news, and maybe my internet connection is not going to cooperate. Well, if this comes up later on, I'll share it with you. It's basically just me on the news. They had a very long interview with me. And of the entire interview, they showed about 3 seconds of me saying, you know, we may never get back into this building. That's what they put on the news. So you were referring to HireView.
Yeah.
Last night, the CEO of HireView was speaking at the Beehive event that we have, the business event. And he told a story of how he received a phone call in 2008 from Rackspace, saying, the CEO of Rackspace called him up. You know, Rackspace is a very reputable company. Right? And the CEO is in a panic, and he says, you know, I don't know what to tell you, but a semi-truck has crashed into the building where your servers are housed, and they are destroyed. So HireView, a young company, still trying to get off the ground, they have no backup of their data. They have no copy of the code that was on their servers. They're facing the closure of their business because of something that happened states and states away. They finally, it has a happy ending, right? They finally found an old copy of their code on a CD-ROM somewhere. Somebody dug one up, and they were able to get back up and running from what was on the CD-ROM.
I really like your message that you shouldn't go in there because it's dangerous, but how do you take a technical person, because I think we're all technical, it's our nature to go into the fire, we're troubleshooters, right? That's what we do, we live for that. How did you instill the idea of put your safety first instead of going in? Because I don't know that I could stop myself or my team from going in.
It's training.
What did you have special sessions to try to
we had
help
nothing.
them?
No, we had nothing.
Since then.
Oh, since then. I'm not with the company anymore. The company has basically been moved out to Vermont. But to answer your question, I think that the best way to do it is with training. Is to have a company policy of employee safety first. And you have to instill it. You have to bring it up. You have to talk about it. Right? Having a disaster recovery plan in a drawer somewhere doesn't protect the person who comes on the building and it's on fire. He thinks, our backups. Oh, our tape drives. Oh, X, Y, or Z. That's a question.
You're talking about CERT in the beginning, and I've done some stuff with CERT, and I've done a lot of safety training with one of my previous jobs. And the training, like you said, it has to be to the point that at some point in that training you say, why in the hell am I doing this? I've gone over this again and again. And you get trained at that much because when this happens, yes, you still panic a little bit, but you know X, Y, and Z, I'm going to do this step, that step, that step. It becomes instinct.
Yeah, it's funny because in the case of a fire in our houses, what do we grab?
Computer photos.
Your kids? What else do you
Well, after
grab?
family.
See,
Data.
You said your photos and your data, but should you? Like, is your life more or less valuable? Your data should be in the cloud, right? Put a copy of your photos in a safe deposit box somewhere. But what do you grab? You grab your kids, right? And then you get out of the house. We know that, right? We've been trained that. We train our kids that. Don't go back for things. When you're in school, you're trained. No, don't go back for things.
When I worked for a previous institution about 10 years ago, it was during the SARS scare. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what if you can't, I mean, the building is still there, the infrastructure is still intact, but you can't leave your house. There's some kind of quarantine or something going on. So something additional, disaster related, but not.
Right, what if you can't get back to your business for another reason? Right.
Or for longer.
That's a good point.
Isn't it easier to just not have a disaster?
Everyone put that at the top of your disaster. So for each of the critical assets that you previously identified, how would you keep it going? Right? An ounce of prevention. Put your website in the cloud, if it's in your closet, it's 2014, people. I've had websites in closets. I know I'm not immune.
Actually, this is mentioned several years. So in initial site development or decision, you want to analyze possible disasters and plan your site so that you're less likely to be at the bottom of the hill or something like that.
Yeah.
I think the NSA, when they put their data center in, they got it out of floodplains and as much as they could out of earthquakes.
Yeah, if you talk to some of our local ISPs, like FiberNet comes to mind, I've spoken with them. The location of their building, there are a bunch of things they've done, right? The earthquake is built to code, exceeds California code and all these things. They talk about flight paths of airplanes. What are the chances of an airplane? Right, they're mitigating every possible, and maybe that's, I'm not saying you should try to get your employees into a place where airplanes aren't flying over, but you do need to consider the likely disasters. Yeah?
I think a good point too is some of us aren't the ones who make the decision. We make recommendations on these decisions. I think the higher ups, you have to have a conversation of what is their level of expectation. Make them tell you, we're not going to spend $1 million to do this. So we accept the fact that this stuff might go down. Because
Right.
it's going to, if not, they're going to now, when the disaster says, why didn't you do all of this stuff?
Right.
But if you have already had the conversation and they say 2 days is okay, rather than spending $50,000, now it's done. At least now you're covered. Because as an IT person, you know it's going to be your fault.
It's always your fault.
So have that conversation before. What is your level of comfort? We can give you everything in the cloud. It's going to cost this much.
Right.
Because I don't know that that's. It's what you're saying is great, but practical, safety. Are you kidding me? I'm not going to go in the building. There's nothing in there that's that important. Some of that stuff is really important. If it's going to cost you 10 days of downtime if you don't have it. So have that. What is your comfort level conversation? So you're covered.
And don't let perfect be the enemy of good.
Exactly.
Right? Don't not have the basics covered because you can't get everything in the cloud. Don't not put your web servers in the cloud. Is there another comment?
Yeah, most of the time we go immediately to, when we say business continuity or disaster recovery, we go to the really bad scenario. I'll give you an example of one that was totally unexpected that did actually shut a company down immediately. Years ago, I worked for a company that supplied accounting software. One of our companies was a CPA firm. It was a small CPA firm, 2 partners, a few employees. Tax season, one of the partners committed suicide on premises. And of course, the police were called. They immediately locked the place down. They had no backups off-site. They had nothing. That was shut down for a long time while they did their investigations during their crime season.
Okay, so employee committed suicide, I'm just repeating to the mic, around tax season, on the premises of the building, no one could get in. You can't plan for everything, right? But in that case, if they had had a disaster recovery plan that included, say, fire in the building, the information would have been...
If they would have just had, they just would have had backups or off-site.
Backups, off-site backups.
Even on a laptop, just some very basic things that would have, but we all make these assumptions, and it's the assumptions and the upline and downline dependencies that will get us.
That's right. So your resources are always limited, right? None of us here work in an unlimited resources situation where a company says, just go and take a year and figure out disaster recovery, right? That's not going to happen. But if you start with the bare minimum, if you identify the things that are most important, then you can have a plan that will help you to another poor metaphor, right? Weather the storm. So in the case of these resources, you've identified them. How do we keep them going? You've done a little bit of triage. What is most important? Resources are scarce. On whom do you focus? Think about your customers. Does your company have 1 or 2 or a dozen most important customers? Should they hear it from you, or should they find out about it on the news? How long does it take a customer to start looking for alternatives in the case of a disaster? right? That other company that you just barely got the bid, you just barely beat them because you were just a little bit better. Well, when there's a disaster, you just dropped quite a bit in your customer's eyes. And you need to contact them to say, hey, we're down, we're not beaten, we're going to be fine, and give them an estimate. Say, you know, we think we'll be able to have everything back online in 15 minutes. We think we'll be able to have everything back online in 15 days. It matters that they hear it from you. It matters that they've been given expectations. If they don't hear from you, what are they going to assume? The very worst, right? They're going to assume that you're gone for good and not coming back. So you mitigate the threats where you can. You have a plan of response. You minimize the impact where you can. And you keep going the best that you can. So what ruins a disaster recovery business continuity plan? What ruins them? Well, the most obvious one, not having one, right? Not having one in the first place. But once you've got one, should it be electronic?
A copy of it.
A copy of it should be electronic. Where should it be housed? On the boss's computer in the boss's and the CEO's office?
One thing I got told is the importance of a document, picture, whatever, is equal to the amount of backups you have minus 1. So if you have like 5 backups, it's really important because you have them in 5 different places. So I mean, yeah, you know, if you have a hard copy of it like at all the managers' desks, have an electronic copy on the cloud, on your wiki, have it all over the place.
On the cloud, in your wiki, someplace secure. So a lot of times these documents contain information that you can't share with the public, right? The CEO's mother-in-law's cell phone.
Not a good place.
You don't want to put that on the cloud, or at least not public. What about where the CEO vacations in the summer? Also probably not public information, right? But you want to have copies of it. I liked your 2 suggestions. Another suggestion is fireproof safe at an executive's home. So safe from fire and secure. On the cell phone?
Put them on cell phone.
Possibly. Keep it secure?
Correct.
And you got to have some way to make sure you keep them in sync.
Yes. Then that's the next slide. You got to educate the employees so they know where the disaster recovery business continuity plan is. Having one and no one can get to it, you might as well not have one. You've got to practice your plan. You've got to test your backups. How many here have had backups that weren't really backups? Where you said, oh, we lost some data, that's okay, we've got backups. And you went to them and they didn't work. Data was missing.
Or they're 6 years old.
Or they're so old that they might as well not exist. Yeah.
Yeah, my father, he had backups, and he had to go to his 4th backup to finally get the data.
He's lucky that he had 4 backups, right? A lot of us have
no good.
So more than 2.
I like the -1. That your backups are only as good as -1.
So how important is it to you? You should have that many -1. I like that. And then you have practice drills, right? How many of us have had fire drills, right? You have to have drills so it gets drilled into your mind. Question?
Oh, I was just going to say, we did a practice drill with disaster recovery. It was important to have a designated place decided amongst everybody in the company where we meet if we can't get back to the building. And so we had a hotel designated where we meet. And we actually did a practice where we had no access to see if we could get back up. It was real eye-opener to us because you don't cover everything. Even if you have the best plan, you need practice to find your holes.
So hotel is a great idea for disasters that only affect your company.
Yeah.
But what happens when there's a flood in an area?
Oh yeah, there's the regional and the national and there's the whole.
All of a sudden everyone goes to the hotel, and now the hotel is a new crisis is arising. So this is one of the most important parts. Your very most basic plan should have everyone's contact information, and it should have this: the last time it was updated, and the next time it's going to be updated. Okay, if you're doing it every 6 months, great. If you're doing it every year, great. Just make sure you write these 2 things into it. This way, you know whether or not it's out of date, and you know whether or not you need to have another update of it. And you've got to keep it updated.
Yeah, I'll tell you, you'll go back and tell your CEO about this, and he'll get excited, and you'll do a plan, and then they're all gonna forget about it. And if you don't have a plan to update the plan, it will not get done, because you will get back to work and everything else will be more important. Because you'll get them excited today or next week when you get there, but you gotta keep them.
You gotta keep it updated. And if it's only in your department, let that be the beginning of a plan for your company, right? So your plan can be ruined if it's out of date. It can be ruined if if it doesn't include directives for its own handling, and so it's lost. So perfect is the enemy of good. The worst thing is not to have a plan, because the perfect plan is out of reach. Too expensive, you're not going to get backing for it in the company. And that's pretty much it. I'm just double checking to make sure I covered everything. Yeah?
I was just going to say that, a lot of this sounds scary to have to deal with. And it is scary if you've had to deal with, rocks coming through the back wall and things like that. But at least most all of us, I believe, are in businesses that you can plan and you can mitigate it. You're not running the convenience store at the corner where they can't move their business somewhere else if rocks come through the back wall. They will be shut down.
Right. It is possible for each of us in an IT situation, right? Online company, right, to make backups and to make sure we have things.
I was just going to say, to the gentleman here's point, depending on the size of your company and you're going back to the CEO and they're interested for a little while, temporarily, it's really helpful. Some of us come from more regulated environments where in healthcare, for instance, the OCR demands that you have a certain level. In nuclear, you have to do certain things. And so, and to the extent that you can leverage the things like either PCI or Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever, and the requirements in those, you can start to surface and get that level of importance up, even if you're in maybe not a highly regulated.
That's a really good point. In fact, a company before this, where I worked, we had a business continuity and disaster recovery plan. Why did we have one? Customers demanded it. Customers who were highly regulated came to us and said, we love your product, we can't use you unless you can provide these 5 or 6 things. And the disaster recovery business continuity plan was high on their list. And so we had one. We did. So it's another way to make the argument is from a financial side. Say we will lose customers and we may not get customers if we don't have a plan in place.
Also, the cloud is the best and worst thing in the world. Just because a vendor says it's in the cloud and it's not in your building doesn't mean it's. Everyone thinks that, if you put something on Amazon, it's in 12 places across the world.
Yeah, I thought the cloud was magical.
Do your work, do your homework. Where you're putting it, is it replicated? What is their disaster plan? What is their guarantee? And check their references, because sometimes the cloud is just a data center that's not in your data center. A truck can hit it.
Yeah, it gets hit by a truck, and then you suddenly realize there was only one.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thanks everybody.